It's great to be joined today by Terry Kogan, who's professor of law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. This topic of bathrooms has really come to the forefront of national media, mostly through discussions of so-called transgender bathroom bills. And one of the arguments that we often hear from those who are against laws that allow individuals to use, or rather, those who want individuals to be forced to use the bathroom that matches their birth genitals, often argue that it's completely natural, obvious, and has been the way things are done forever, that bathrooms in public are segregated by genitals. That's not actually true, is it?
That's absolutely not true, though you're right that most people hold that intuition that it makes perfect sense that because there are two different sexes and because people need privacy, that it's the natural way to separate public restrooms. In fact, that is not how the first laws in the United States came about.
So, talk to us, for people who don't know the backstory. When did sex segregated public restrooms come about? And people may have no idea that this really does connect to the Industrial Revolution in great part.
Absolutely. So the first laws in the United States that required sex segregated restrooms were adopted at the end of the 19th century, and they applied to factories and other workplaces. The first law was in Massachusetts in 1887. New York adopted a similar law the next year, and by 1920, over 40 states had adopted laws requiring that factory restrooms be separated by sex. And I was interested now several years ago in what led to these laws being adopted. And what I discovered is that the origin of these laws actually dates back to the beginning of the 19th century and the so-called separate spheres ideology. And here's what that's all about. Until the end of the 18th century, the economy of the United States ran largely out of the home. Men and women would not only raise their families in the home, but through trades and crafts create goods that would then be sold out of the home. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, manufacturing became centralized in factories in the United States. And what started happening was that men left the home to work in these factories, whereas women stayed in the home to take care of their families. And there arose, as I suggested, a vision called the separate spheres ideology, which suggested that the proper sphere for men was in the public realm, in factories, as political leaders, and the proper sphere for women was in the home, watching the hearth fires and raising their kids. This ideology was broadly accepted culturally in the United States beginning in the early 19th century. The problem was that shortly after the beginning of the century, women began leaving the home to work in factories. In 1822, when the textile factories, for example, in Lowell, Massachusetts, were up and running, a large number of the operatives in those factories were women. So there is this cultural ideology that women should stay at home, and the reality of the evolving 19th century is that women are leaving the home in droves, and you end up with the following situation. Every time a woman left the home to enter the public realm, it created a kind of social, cultural anxiety. And in response to that, there were two reactions by the mid-19th century. The first reaction was that states began adopting protective labor legislation that applied to women and children, legislation that limited the number of hours that women could work, legislation that limited certain dangerous jobs only to men, Women were forbidden from those jobs. But in addition to this legislation, a very interesting architectural response began happening in the United States, where there were separate spaces, architectural spaces in buildings created for women. So, for example, in public libraries, early in the 19th century, women weren't allowed in public libraries. But once they were allowed in such libraries, beginning in the 1840s, you discover that separate women's reading rooms were created. You discovered that in hotels, in photography studios, that would be separate, in department stores, separate salons for women. And the idea was women are inherently vulnerable when they enter the public realm, and therefore they need a protected space when they enter the public realm.
So Terry, if I may, it sounds like what you're sort of saying is, as we often hear from social conservatives in other areas, what they want to present as sort of the way things have been for as far back as we can figure it out in human society was actually something sort of acutely established sometime as far back as the 19th century, as you're saying, or sometimes as recently as the 1950s, but at some point in the last several hundred years.
The 1850s.
1850s. I'm sorry. Yes, I might have. Well, no. Right, sometimes it seems like the conservatives want to go to the 1950s specifically. So that would be sort of not with this particular issue, but I was sort of setting the range.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. That's right. That there is a sense that the establishment of a custom, as you suggested earlier, was simply natural, the way things should be, and laws simply reflect that natural state of things, and my research has shown that that's just wrong. So just to finish the story, by the 1880s, this notion of creating exclusive spaces for women in public began being applied to the factory. And the factories in the late 19th century were dangerous places. There is no doubt about that. Moreover, given the rise of the Victorian era, men and women would work next to each other in factories on assembly lines, which caused great concern. So the solution to protect women in factories was to create a kind of home-like haven in the public realm in the guise of a separate public restroom. There were also laws that required separate dressing rooms, and there were laws that required resting rooms for women, all aimed at protecting women in this dangerous public realm.
What do we know if we go further back, and this goes beyond the United States, but maybe going back to Europe, in terms of bathroom spaces or bathroom-like spaces, of course, predating modern plumbing or anything like it? What do we know about the organization of these spaces with regard to gender?
Okay, so realistically, the possibility of a multi-user bathroom did not come about until the technology of public works, of sewer systems, allowed there to be indoor plumbing where the effluence was taken away from buildings through sewers.
Right.
And that did not come about. The first well-known public bathrooms were at the Great Exhibition in London in 1849. In the United States, the technology did not reach a stage. Public works were not developed enough until the mid-1870s that would even allow a multi-user bathroom. Before then, you have basically separate single-user privies, outhouses, whatever. Once in a while, you would find that there would be two of these privies next to each other, one labeled men, one labeled women, but often that would be a single privy used by both sexes, but what is important is they were all single user. So the modern tension over bathrooms only arises because of the possibility of a multi-user bathroom. And in the United States, that did not happen until roughly the 1870s.
Absolutely fascinating. And this is really, really important to keep in mind when we talk about and evaluate arguments made around what bathroom laws should be today. It's really important to have an understanding of how things actually were previously in human society. We've been speaking to Terry Kogan, professor of law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. So great to talk to you. I really appreciate it.
David, it was good talking to you.